pfSense and UniFi are both really popular firewalls, and it would seem like an easy choice for all the videos I've done talking about access point switches and many other features of the UniFi ecosystem that we would just use UniFi firewall so it keeps it in one ecosystem. And while that would be ideal, for years it was never possible because of feature requests that clients had and businesses needed that just didn't fit the UniFi platform. They were, well, falling short, and I was very vocal about this. But me being vocal about it was to hopefully get change from UniFi or get them going in the direction that met my clients' needs, because then we can put things in a complete ecosystem. And I think with version 9 that they released in January 2025, UniFi really has caught up. So in this video, I'm not here to tell you which one to use, because that's not really my style. I'm here to present the data, how the pfSense ecosystem works, how the UniFi ecosystem works, specifically around firewalls for this video, but do a feature comparison of them so you can make an informed decision of which one fits your needs. Or maybe neither one of them do, and you'll just stop watching the video here, because those are the only two firewalls that are going to be covered in this particular video. Leave me some comments down below of which other firewalls you want me to dig into, and if I have experience with them, I will also do a video on that. Now, no matter what firewall you choose, today's sponsor of the video, Micro Center, is a great place to buy those devices that go behind that firewall. At Micro Center, you can pick up a few cameras, a UniFi NVR, and then go from there and buy, well, all the other UniFi stuff that you might want, such as access points, switches, or you can start building out your full rack. From small Raspberry Pi projects to full-on racing simulator builds, Micro Center has an amazing array of tech, and their helpful store staff will help you find it all. We thank them for sponsoring this video. Now, to keep this narrowed down a little bit in scope, I'm not covering all of the UniFi firewalls. I'm covering the slightly higher end models, because if we go down to the $129 models, there's nothing wrong with them, but I can't talk about WAN failover when they don't have 2 WAN ports, and those models also don't support BGP, but why would you expect a $129 device to have BGP? So I just narrowed those down and don't have them on the list. Also, I want to note the UXG Pro and UXG Enterprise that I do have on this list do not have a built-in controller. Therefore, you can host them with the self-hosted instance of the UniFi controller software. That is an option for those, versus the other ones can't be adopted to controller software because they come with built-in controllers. So that is a little bit different. So I just made a note at the top about it. That is just to keep things a little bit narrower in scope and not have a whole extra column like I did previously for the UXG. The other reason for removing that column is it's pretty much reached feature parity. There's minor differences I'll note as we go through here, but for the most part, all these features are now available both in the UXG Enterprise, UXG Pro, and the UDM Pro line of devices. Now, with pfSense, we're just talking about pfSense Plus and not any specific Netgate hardware. Speaking of hardware, can you run it on your own hardware? With pfSense Plus, yes. With UniFi, I don't see that on the roadmap. I don't think it's a really big deal. It's kind of their model is, here's a software that works with our hardware specifically, and all the customization is basically with their hardware. But can it be virtualized? Same answer. No, you cannot virtualize the UDMs or any of the UniFi software. Now, you can host the controller, but that's not the same as the actual firewall. Centralized management. This was a no previously on pfSense. They have since released a beta version of their self-hostable on a Netgate device software for managing other firewalls. It's interesting. I've tested it. They have some documentation and videos on it you can watch. UniFi's had this for a long time via the UniFi Site Manager or the UniFi Controller if you're using the UXG, but then you can also tie it to their Site Manager. That's that little nuanced difference on there, but you don't have to use their cloud. I want to make sure that's very clear. There was a brief period in time where they did force registration. That is not the case. Any of these can be set up independently without tying to the UniFi cloud system, but of course that will limit some of the features, such as being able to have a central management place where all of your firewalls connect to. Web interface. Yes, these both have web interfaces, but you talk to the UniFi network server, whether you host it externally or in the case of the UDM Pro series, the built-in one, that's where the web interface lives, because it manages with UniFi more than just the firewall, but it's where the central management is. Versus pfSense, it's natively built in as part of the operating system. License fees, free with Netgate hardware, and because it doesn't run anywhere else, there's no license fees with any of the UniFi lineup as well. Automated updates. There are no automated update features inside of pfSense. You can build your own, you can force it to do updates, but it's generally a manual process. It is not any easy mechanism, just check a box. By default, and this makes me very happy, UniFi has automatic updates turned on. You can override that if you have a need to do that. You can control and schedule when they get pushed. You can do them completely manually, but that is an option that is on by default when you set it up. Granular change in rollbacks. Yes, and ZFS OS rollbacks. The pfSense system not only has a XML file that has all the incremental changes that were made, you can grab any one of those changes and roll back to them or restore to that exact point. Not only that, the ZFS OS rollbacks are part of the update process now, where when you update it, it takes a snapshot of the entire operating system and has an automated system that will reboot to the previous snapshot if needed if a update fails. That is currently not a feature that UniFi has. Maybe it'll be on the roadmap for the future, but they do tell you at least the changes that occurred. They just don't have an option to roll them back. High availability. That's been a long time with pfSense, and it's supported on all pfSense models, and it's referred to as shadow mode. And I put the little asterisk there because it's not on every single device, certainly not on their low-end ones. Do check with the model before you purchase it. It'll say on the listing whether or not it supports what they refer to as shadow mode, but that's their high availability. It does work different than the way it works in pfSense. I have not done a specific video on that, but they do have good documentation on how that works. Multi-WAN support. This was weird that I had to list this out, but there was some nuances missing before. This is one of the features that UniFi took a little while to catch up on, is not just multi-WAN support. Assigning blocks of IPs to those WAN interfaces was kind of a challenge. There was always a behind-the-scenes way to do it from the command line, but it wasn't in the UI, and it's all in the UI now. VLAN support. Yes, we can do VLANs on both of these platforms. No, because someone asked us on the last video, can we do VXLAN? No, either one of these devices have specific support for VXLAN. But they both do now have BGP and OSPF support, and this goes for all the models now that I had listed, like the UXG series didn't have that previously. They used to only support OSPF. Now they're both supported on there. And even some of the smaller models do actually support OSPF. Captive portal, yes. And via the UniFi controller, yes. So it does it in both. It's just handled differently. pfSense has a captive portal management tool, and that's what that next line is Let's Encrypt, or more specifically, the ACME protocol, because you can use the automation to pull in a wildcard cert and manage all of your certificates that way, and including your captive portal one. So this is managed via the UniFi controller, and you can bring in certificates manually. There's just not at present an automated way to do that. Identity provider integrations. Yes, for LDAP and Radius. It means you can integrate with a lot using that, whether it's an external LDAP server, external Radius server, or you can use free Radius inside of Netgate. And essentially they've got similar where you have the Radius server built into the UniFi platform, but they've actually added now Active Directory, MS Entra, Google, and Jump Cloud. And this is really nice, being able to just drop into the Microsoft Entra ID or Active Directory or Google Secure or just normal LDAP as a directory service. Also worth noting outside the scope of this, but they have their entire identity management system that UniFi offers that can be integrated in here as well. Now, this needs a little bit more of a qualifier here when I say OpenVPN, that they both support it, but I say that support is very basic in the UniFi system. Inside of UniFi, when you create a new OpenVPN server, even with the manual settings, not a whole lot going on in here in terms of customization or every option or every setting. Lets you create the user, it does let you download the configuration file, and it's probably fine for most people. But when we come over here to pfSense, you can see there are far more options. There's a lot of different ciphers you can choose. There's a lot of details you can put in here. And if for some reason there's not an option you want, but it's something that's supported, you can add these custom options to pass it through to the OpenVPN server running behind in pfSense. So this pretty much gives you anything you ever wanted to do or fine tune inside of OpenVPN. This is a double-edged sword, obviously, because having a lot of options means people can goof with a lot of options or be overwhelmed by all the choices. And I think for most people, a basic OpenVPN server might be all they need, but this is what I mean when I say basic support versus advanced support. Now, both platforms support IPSEC. Both platforms support Wireguard, but the current Wireguard implementation doesn't support site-to-site, and I'm hoping they make it look like a more proper WireGuard implementation where you have all the different peering set up. They have it set up like client server. That's not exactly how WireGuard works, so I'm not a fan of the way it's presented inside of UniFi, but it does work. It does have the ability to be a WireGuard server, as they call it, or a WireGuard client. And they actually have a way you can download a config file and upload it to another system to get WireGuard going, but they don't seem to have all the features exposed. But I believe that will change in the future, as I know site to site is on the roadmap for them. L2TP VPN is supported. That's an older VPN, but it's still in there built in. Automatic site to site. This is a no for pfSense, but the Site Magic SD-WAN is actually really cool. You have the hub and spoke option up to 1,000 sites, 20 sites for mesh, and it's very automated. And only one of these devices has to have a public IP address. So when you get started, I can choose one device with a public IP, choose several other devices that don't have a public IP, and then add them together, and it will just automatically build all the routing. So you don't have to go through all the manual process for this. Now, pfSense does support Tailscale, which is really popular right now for an overlay VPN to easily get around things like NAT and some of the firewall traversal problems. They do offer Teleport VPN. I do want to make note, Teleport VPN, if you're using a UXG right now, does require that it's tied to a cloud key, because it needs something running the UniFi Cloud OS software on a cloud key, not just the standard UniFi controller to get teleport working. That may change in the future, but that is the way it works now. So just a real nuanced difference between the UXG versus the UDM line. It is supported natively. And the Teleport VPN now has clients, not just for the phones, but for also the desktop apps as well. Now, policy routing is a yes for both of these, but IDS and IPS, yes, Suricata or Snort, and all the details you would ever want, and probably more than you even need if you want to dive into how security works or how Suricata or Snort sees these. You have the option of configuring it, and all the rules are exposed and all the features are exposed. But when you get into the way it works inside of UniFi, it's a lot more basic. It may be adequate for you, but there's a huge difference in the tunables that you have options for. They also now have the Proofpoint CyberSecure subscription that you can buy for extra threat protection. You can do that with the Netgate as well, but you're buying a Snort or Suricata subscription or the more ET advanced rules, but those are separate and not at all purchased through Netgate. They're just separate feeds you may want to purchase. With UniFi, they are now offering the Proofpoint CyberSecure, but there's not any other options when you're putting there. You either buy that feed or you can use the free feed that comes with it, which is adequate. It's basically the ET open rules, because underneath the hood, their IDS system is using Suricata. Content filtering and controls. Squid has been deprecated because it's got a lot of security problems, and I never thought Squid was a great way to do it. It was never easy or, well, intuitive to manage, versus you can do pretty basic application layer filtering. It's doing SNI inspection, but if you want full-on SSL, that's actually now supported as well. So you have the basic features that are in a lot of the models, but the SSL inspection, where you do have to install a certificate on each of the clients, and this is done on a per network basis, the EFG and UXG Enterprise do have support for that now. Traffic monitoring and reporting, yes, and Top PNG, you've done videos on that. This is just a built-in feature to tell you some traffic analysis and tell you what applications are using what bandwidth and which devices are doing it. DNS filtering, PF blocker, which of course supports many, many feeds. There's no custom feed option, but they do have DNS filtering options built into UniFi now. DNS management, yes and yes, but let's show that really quick. UniFi now supports host records and MX records, which I think is interesting, and text and SRV and forward domain. Most people probably just need host records is enough, but now they've got these advanced options, and I think that's great. But when we come over to pfSense, there's a lot more advanced options. So if you need some really advanced DNS features, there is just a lot you can do in here that is not available inside of UniFi. And the same thing goes for DHCP server. They have a basic working DHCP server inside of UniFi, but DHCP inside of pfSense has way more options. Because while I am able to take any particular device and give it a fixed IP address, that's not the same as having a full-blown DHCP server with every option exposed, not just reservations. GeoIP filtering supported in UniFi and pfSense. Traffic shaping in QoS. There's some nuance here I want to talk about. Inside of UniFi, you can select the source as a specific device. So maybe you want to apply QoS to a device and maybe a specific category like online gaming or file transfer or email. It's application aware and then gives you options to set the download limit and bandwidth limit, choose the interface, or even a schedule. Now, if you run the wizard, there's a limited amount of application aware QoS, but what pfSense does instead is gives you really good details for queue management, right down to choosing the different algorithms and fine-tuning each of those algorithms. So you can get really fine-grained in control, but you don't have the application levels, but you do have application in UniFi. So kind of can't really say that it's just QoS. It's done so differently in them, but technically the boxes check. They both do have QoS and the ability to do this. I've talked before about how to set up the limiters, and there is a similar system to do traffic management inside of UniFi on the back end. Pretty sure they're using the same CODL limiters and possibly tail drop. I'm not exactly sure, but this is something that UniFi doesn't really expose to you, but you can go in behind the scenes in SSHN and look at it, but it's not anything you control through the web UI, versus pfSense gives you full granular detailed control over how that's set up. Packet capture and diagnostic tools. This is interesting. It's been added now to UniFi, but in pfSense, we're going to go a little further on diagnostic tools. So it's not just about packet capture. It's really fine-grained diagnostics. I think it's nice that pfSense exposes all of these. And it's not just your basic tools, it's all of them. You can run iPerf, you can run the pftop, which I've talked a lot about, so we can see each individual connection. We can look at the routes. We can really dive deep with this because it's kind of a Swiss Army knife. I've always liked that they built this in, but I will admit having the packet capture, being able to select the different networks on here, or you can pivot to the devices that are managed in here to do packet capture on individual devices as well. So I really welcome that feature. Maybe they'll add a few more tools for a little bit deeper diagnostics. Now, SNMP monitoring is supported on both platforms now. Netflow export is supported on both. Logging and alerting, that is something that is lacking in the past, but of course much more detailed today, because we have activity logging that can be internally stored, and we can now go full on SIEM server monitoring and pipe this out. Now, this is a feature that's been supported in pfSense. You're just shipping off all the syslog and all that data to wherever you want as a destination, but this gives you the same ability now to push all of that data out, and it is supported now with several other different clients for ingestion. This was a feature that a lot of people needed for compliance and was one of the checkboxes that has to be checked, that you have to be able to take and do log ingestion. Now that they've set it up so it's doing proper log exporting, there's now tooling available that does support the ingestion of those logs. And it does give you more than just syslog in terms of what data you want to send. Time-based firewall rules, that is supported on both systems. And I mention this mostly because I use it, and I know a lot of people that do based on the videos I've done on HA Proxy. It is nice having that built in. I don't know it's really on the UniFi roadmap. It's a cool, nice to have. I did like the convenience of it because, as I noted earlier, we have Let's Encrypt built into pfSense, so it's automatically pulling the certificates, and then we can tie those certificates to HA Proxy and have it serve, even if I'm not publicly exposing it, as the reverse proxy that sits at the center of my network and all of my different services attached to. So I have nice setup for that with a wildcard cert. Now let's talk firewall rules. I am very used to the pfSense interface because I've been using it for so long. Anytime you have an interface and you assign an interface, that interface can have firewall rules, and that includes the VPNs. You can build virtual interfaces that way, or VLANs that way, and then each interface gets its own set of rules where you apply them to. The way it works in UniFi, or the way it used to work, was just outright confusing. I think this method, even though I've not learned it well just yet, presents much better, because even with my lesser knowledge, because I don't use UniFi firewalls as much, it wasn't hard at all for me to figure out, oh, this is where I can filter to these specific policies, or these external policies, or the VPN rules, or even creating a zone and then applying rules to that zone. And then as you build networks, you can move things in and out of it. I think this is a much, much better way to handle the firewall rules. It is much less confusing. And the nice thing is they gave people a clear upgrade path. So if you were using the previous rules before, they give you an option to convert when you went from version 8 to version 9, your existing rules into this format. So I'll be diving deeper to this in the future, but I do think this is greatly improved in the way they present firewall rules and makes it a lot less confusing, especially to newcomers that may be starting out with a firewall. Now, this video so far has been covering the most common questions people have about UniFi or pfSense, and they're the most common use cases for firewalls, filtering or traffic management, and just general firewall rules. What about those of you that have these weird, esoteric, and really interesting ideas or needs or use cases? Well, that's where pfSense can really shine, because if I said I wanted to reassign all of these ports, except for one to be LAN and the rest all to WAN, all ports are reassignable in any way you see fit. UniFi has more limitations around that. It just doesn't check those boxes, but those aren't boxes most people need checked. This is kind of that one-off unusual thing. For example, I can bond these together to become a switch port and then do all kinds of funky management with that, along with setting up transparent options. And I've covered this before in other videos, so you can transparently watch data that traverses it. There's really some unique things, but as I just said, they're unique. They're one-off. They're kind of, interesting. And I think if you have those use cases, then yeah, UniFi will never satisfy those for you. And it's not like that's the market they're trying to target, because that's not the majority market. Now, another thing worth noting is security. The most common question, I guess, that is not something that's a feature, but just, are these secure devices, whether you're talking about pfSense or you're talking about UniFi? Now, the way pfSense delivers software is different. Both the CE and the Plus version have a patching system, and you have to apply those patches. UniFi does this with their software updates, but both companies are very on top of security, that being Netgate, the people behind pfSense, and the team at UniFi. UniFi's even got a very advanced bug bounty program, so there's never any qualms I've had about their security. They're quite on top of that. Their problems have always been around the features that we're missing, and that's ultimately what drives decisions, is meeting clients' needs and making sure those needs are met with the features that the devices offer. When the firewall does not have, for example, the ability to export SIM logs, we can't use it in a compliance environment that requires that type of logging, which has brought us all the way here in 2025, where we are selling more UniFi firewalls, because now they have the features that are available that meets the client demand. So now I can put in an entire UniFi ecosystem, from the firewall down to the switches and down to the access points, and have a single pane of glass to see it all. I actually really like that. I'm so happy to say that UniFi has caught up on features in a firewall that meets most client demands in many, many environments now. But ultimately, I'm curious, which one do you choose, UniFi or pfSense? Which one works the best for you? Leave those thoughts and comments down below, or head over to my forums for a more in-depth discussion on this and other topics. Like and subscribe to see more content from the channel. Head over to lawrencesystems.com to connect with me on whatever socials you'll find me on there, or sign up for our newsletter to keep up with what's going on, and I'll see you online. Thanks.